Assalamu alaikum, people.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi.
I found this recently, and I was taken aback quite a bit. You know Dr. Michael Brown?
Yes.
You're a big fan of him, aren't you? I don't know what that means, but it can't be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was actually talking to a Christian in the comments section about Psalm 22, his argument, he actually quoted something from Dr. Michael Brown's book, one of his books. And I was actually shocked. Well, I thought I thought if you were going to quote one of these people's sources or whatnot, you would at least quote the references they use, not the person himself. Like, that's how desperate they are to defend this prophecy. But let's see. This is Dr. James White and Michael Brown.
And then as we go down to verse 17, kisvavuni klavim, so dogs surround me, hikifunia, the assembly of the wicked compass around me. Then the Hebrew, as we have it in the vast majority of our Masoretic texts, it says kari yadai v'raglai, which, if you just translated it literally, would be like a lion, my hands and my feet. So there's a slight issue that this is Ari, whereas lion earlier was Aryeh, just different spelling, but leave that out. If it is like a lion, my hands and feet, remember it's like a lion tearing and biting. So here's what major rabbinic commentaries say in explaining it. Rashi, who's the foremost medieval Jewish commentator, said this, the meaning of like lion at my hands and feet, it is as though they are crushed, my hands and feet are crushed in a lion's mouth. Another famous commentary, Mitzudat David, they crush my hands and my feet as the lion which crushes the bones of the prey in its mouth. So even if this was the correct reading, and there are strong Jewish reasons, not Christian reasons, strong Jewish reasons for questioning this is the right reading, the verb is missing, okay? It is like a lion, my hands and feet. The verb is missing. What are they doing? So these rabbinic commentators say they're crushing my hands and feet or biting my hands and feet. Even if that was the reading, another very vivid description of crucifixion and the suffering of the cross.
Hang on. Yeah.
Okay. He's misreading Rashi. So what he's doing here, right, is that essentially he's saying that Rashi is here that's saying that the Mashiach, well, not the Mashiach, sorry, but the person that this passage is talking about will have his hands and feet crushed by a lion. Rashi, if you actually look at the commentary for this specific verse, when he says it is like a lion crushing the hands and feet, that's not the belief at all. The belief about Tehillim 22, which we will discuss soon among the Jews, right, is completely different from this. What Rashi was doing in the commentary is that he was just saying, right, he was using a comparison with a specific word within the verse and compared it to another verse. He's either misunderstanding or misreading Rashi.
Right.
He was not saying that the person in this prophecy was going to have his hands and feet crushed by a lion.
What I find interesting, though, is that he even admitted that this is a medieval Jewish commentator. I thought he was trying to prove that this is just what Jews believed throughout history. Wouldn't he have to go through pre-Christianity to do that?
Apparently, I mean, he's saying that rabbinic Jewish commentators, he's trying to proclaim that rabbinic Jewish commentators agree that essentially the Messiah will be, pained or something, or that this is about the Messiah, etc. But there's no mention about the Mashiach in this passage, but regardless, let's continue. He's misquoting Rashi.
For questioning if that is the right text. And so the evidence that we have, the oldest Hebrew manuscript carrying this psalm from the Dead Sea Scrolls does not read Ka'ari with a final yud, but Ka'aru. The letters are very close. One is just longer than the other, final vav versus final yud. And Ka'aru could mean to dig through, to bore through, hence to pierce. The Septuagint, which is the oldest translation we have of the Hebrew into another language, reads, they pierced. And then we talk about the Masoretic text.
Hang on.
Okay.
That's a bit of a non sequitur?
Well, first of all, here's the thing, right? He's pointing out here, okay, that there are variations not only in spelling, but there are variations in wording, like with the Septuagint and with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Christians who bring this up many, many times, right, are essentially, many times they'll use the Dead Sea Scrolls or Septuagint, essentially to their advantage. I've seen many missionaries do it, seen many laymen do it, etc., and trying to prove that Jesus was present in the old Hebrew scriptures. First of all, I wouldn't want to go into the changes in numbering, in words, adding verses, etc. that the Septuagint has. I'm not going to give an entire lecture about the corruption, but regardless of this, right, it does not matter. Like, we cannot use the Septuagint and the DSS as reliable sources, okay? We don't know who wrote the DSS. We don't know who wrote the Septuagint. We don't know a single name of the supposed 73 rabbis who were captured and sent to Alexandria to translate the Septuagint. We have no idea where they're from. We have no information about them. All we know is that there were 73 rabbis. They were captured and brought to Alexandria. For the DSS, the Septuagint has no author. Okay, the DSS has no scribal house attached to it. The DSS has no information attached to it. It is quite literally a set of random scrolls that were carbon dated back to a specific point. Some people ascribe it to the Essenes, which were a heretical sect denounced by the Jewish people and had a heavy hand in the development of Gnosticism.
But isn't it like the original Septuagint doesn't even exist?
Yes, we don't have the original Septuagint manuscript, but primarily the Septuagint has been changed over time. You can, as I said, you can see it with the Vulgate. You can see it with the, you can see it with the Vulgate. You can see it with the various translations by other church fathers who worked on developing and using the Septuagint to create translations, etc. But once again, I've given a general point here, so let's continue.
There was just one text. There's the Masoretic textual tradition with thousands and thousands of manuscripts. And there are about a dozen of them that have variant readings and read karu or ka'aru, which again would be saying that the reading that we have from the Dead Sea Scrolls is even preserved in medieval Hebrew manuscripts. So this is an entirely Jewish translation issue. It has nothing to do with later Christians changing anything. It's simply a matter of saying which is the most accurate original Jewish text, and you could make a strong argument for something they dug through, they bore through, they pierced as being the original Hebrew reading.
Okay, so let's make sure people understand, because this is where a lot of the argument comes up. And
if someone's hand is crushed by a lion, first of all, and he's not wrong. The Masoretic does have this reading in separate narrations now. If someone's hand is crushed by a lion, right? What is a lion doing? Like, is a lion biting into the hand for it to essentially be, a lion is biting into the hand. So yes, it's going to be dug through. This is not a point for Christianity at all. This is not a proof that Christianity is, that this prophecy is about Jesus as the Mashiach. The Psalms, right, you'll notice Christians do use, right, passages, okay, with prophecies that if you read it with ideology, you read it a certain way, it can apply to various things, right? With Psalm 22, it is the same thing. Because it is a psalm, it uses poetry. Because it is a psalm, it uses things which are essentially, it uses very, very sweet language, right? As opposed to being, having specific prophecies, ascribed to a certain event, which is fine. But I'm just saying you have to pay attention to too many missionaries doing these things.
Because if someone says something ambiguous like a lion, they pierced my hands and my feet, that could apply to several other people before and after Jesus who had the same thing happen to them.
Secondly, it doesn't even have to be literal, which you'll see why it's not. But let's continue.
You spent a fair amount of time in your work on this subject responding to Jewish apologists on this subject who argue that in reality this is a Christian perversion of the text, when everything you just said, you are referring to either Masoretic texts, including from the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the Greek Septuagint. Now, is it the position of some of the Jewish apologists that the Greek Septuagint is Christian in origin rather than Jewish?
You have some. This is not a scholarly perspective. This is a counter-missionary perspective, which often is scholarly, but sometimes is not. So, according to rabbinic tradition, it was only the 5 books of Moses in the Septuagint that were supernaturally inspired and in perfect agreement, which, of course, we know is not the case anyway.
Right.
And that the rest of it is not to be used and it's full of error. And then some would even try to argue that Septuagint manuscripts as we have today reflect Christian interpolations and so on, so that the Septuagint, where it seems to read in harmony with Christian views, is because later Christians changed that. But that's not the view of Septuagint scholars. That's not the view of the academic community, which recognizes that Septuagint, say Septuagint of the Psalms, is completed somewhere in the 3rd century BC.
Right. So this is a Jewish production.
Okay. So I want to point out, they flash like a manuscript and a comparison of like letters on the screen, right? And it's obviously a fragmentation. Once again, we have to say, why are they doing this? Because they keep trying to use things, okay, as we just aforementioned, right? They keep trying to use various manuscripts or various subject matter, right, that we don't have names ascribed to, that we don't have tradition ascribed to. He's not mentioning the fact that the DSS and the Septuagint are completely unreliable because of the fact that we don't know where they came from. And then essentially, and I don't even believe, right, that the oldest manuscripts that we have of the 5 books, of the 5 books of Moses with the Septuagint read in line with, Christian views, and for various reasons, because the fact that the angel of the Lord there's multiple angels of the Lord actually outlined at the Septuagint. They do not translate angel of the Lord as a singular, as a singular entity referring to one personage. So I don't even believe that it reads in line with Christian views. But regardless, the most recent Septuagint manuscripts do the obvious changes. But once again, you can find other Septuagint manuscripts like that are fragmented, that don't have things ascribed, they don't have names ascribed to them, right? And you can see that there's literally changes upon changes between them. So nobody can understand why Christian missionaries are using this as a point for Christianity, or using this as a point for their translation.
And honestly, they can claim all they want to that so many rabbis translated it, but at the end of the day, it's a translation. And a translation
we don't even.
Going to be
the issues we just don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know who translated it.
Yeah, but even then, let's forget that. It's still a Greek translation from a Semitic text. That's already going to be inferior, no matter how well it is.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Known primarily through Christian copying later on, historically speaking, but it was originally a Jewish production. And so what people need to understand is when we mentioned one of the most ancient manuscripts of this particular section, I have it here. We can put it up on the screen. What you were pointing to was the final form. I'll sort of actually, you can see that. Look at that.
Look,
you can see
now he's using it for an actual point, which is more disappointing. They're doing exactly what we're talking about. Okay, this is fragmented. Where does this come from? Okay, we don't once again, if we don't know what the origins are of a certain text, why rely upon it?
Exactly.
Right? If I found essentially if I found let's say I believe that water essentially is H2O, right? If I found an old book, okay, that is older than any other supposed manuscript that I have, telling me that water is H2O, right? Or translation of that book, but it's also older and it's fragmented and doesn't have any sort of source ascribed to it, and it says water is not H2O. What am I supposed to do with this? Secondly, the whole nobody has argued, right, that the Kar'u, right, is somehow a arguing. Nobody has argued that this is a Christian misusage. I don't think anybody has. If they have, then they've overlooked this. Regardless, though, Kar'u, he is once again saying it means to dig through. We have words, for being pierced with a spear, right? In Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10, right? The Mashiach ben Yosef is pierced with a spear in the battle with Gog and Magog, which Christians actually interpret that as Jesus being, pierced on the cross. But, this means to dig through. So Rashi is still not erring here when he says a lion biting somebody's hand, and Rashi didn't say that the person or the thing that that the subject of Psalm 22 etc. is going to have his hand bitten by a lion. This is not the subject matter. Like, once again, so there's
Yeah,
no real point
that
against
actually
Jewish.
that actually is an interesting point. I remember asking once because, like he's saying, if a lion's there, it's gonna crush your bones. But I'm thinking, if that is what the writer of the psalm is trying to get across, then wouldn't he have just said, like a lion, they pierced my hands and feet? He wouldn't just say, oh, they're there. He would actually
Yeah,
say he bit through them.
Rashi was simply using the word, and he was comparing it to another verse. That was it. Like, and now he's saying that, and now he's ascribing these things to Rashi that he never said, etc. But let's continue.
The form here, and the best way of reading that actually fits with the Greek Septuagint reading, which has oruxon, which means to dig at this particular text, to dig or to pierce. And so if this was not a matter of dispute in Jewish apologetics or in Islamic apologetics, if this was a some other subject that didn't have a whole lot of significance to it, everybody would look at it and go, oh, here's a place where the Greek Septuagint is indicating that its source material, its tradition, is one of those places where it differs from the Masoretic and, in fact, may go earlier than the Masoretic
Right.
history does. And nobody would, I mean, there's lots of places like that in
Right, so
in the
he
Old
wasn't
Testament text.
okay. So once again, he's saying it may go earlier than the Masoretic. First of all, no, it doesn't. Secondly, right, the Masoretic, okay, the Masoretes were a movement of people, right? Their name comes from the Hebrew word Masora, right, meaning tradition. The Masoretes were literally various scribal houses that worked to preserve basically any existing manuscripts among the Jewish people at the time. They were verified by the two Gaonates, the Gaonate in the Galilee and the Gaonate in Babel, in Babylon, and their successor, and their successor communities, right? The successor Eidos. So the Masoretic tradition is literally just like continuing upon the Pharisaic tradition, pretty much, which continues back to Ezra, right? That's what the Masoretic tradition is. When people say Masoretic tradition, it just means they're going back essentially, to the Masoretes, to go back to the Pharisees, etc. And the Pharisees go prior, like to Jesus, etc., all the way back to Ezra. Now, he's just saying it might be older. Listen, like,
It can't
as
be.
we've established before, older does not equal somehow more legitimate, right? Like, as we've just established, okay, like saying that it's older, therefore it's more correct is completely, it's nonsensical. Like,
That's an
for
argument
example,
Christians use a lot for their manuscripts, and it's really annoying.
exactly. I mean, like, you'll see with the Christians, right? They'll say we have older manuscripts, okay, but these manuscripts will be fragmented, right? And then they won't have names ascribed to them, and they'll say our Bible is uncorrupted, and there are also, manuscripts older than that which have various changes. But also, right, like, Annie, these sorts of it's nonsensical, right? Like, so for example, like, let's say I find like a manuscript like from the people, from the people of Jerusalem in the time of Ezra, right? And like, just not a Torah, just anything, right? That they've written, and they say we're Jews and we worship idols because the people of Jerusalem, the Anshe Yerushalayim, actually did worship idols in the time of Ezra. That's why Ezra went back to Jerusalem. Not all of them, of course, but a large number. Does this mean that Jews should return to worshiping idols? It doesn't make any sense.
Right. That is true. It's like they don't, unlike the Jews and the Muslims, they don't have a chain going back to any good source. They just have a bunch of texts, and they're like, "Oh, it's early, so it must be true."
So, like, even those who believe in apostolic succession, right, while they're more consistent, have issues, right, with tracking these things. And like, well, Jews and Muslims, okay, we have the biographies of everybody in our chains, okay, and we tell we essentially write down what they did, what their purpose was, how they transmitted it, who they transmitted it to, who witnessed it, etc., and who transmitted these events as well, right? These are both things, so when Muslims have mutawatir reporting, we have Rashi Masoretic, very similar things, right? Now, but Michael Brown is a Protestant, okay, so is I believe the man, the man, this is James White, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I believe so is James White. They do not believe in apostolic succession. right? They believe that is an unneeded doctrine. The problem with Christians who don't believe in apostolic succession is that they cannot establish any sort of
They have
any
nothing.
sort of like chain of transmission. First of all, they can't establish authority going all the way from Christ all the way down to today. Secondly, they are ignoring essentially the various words of previous church fathers, such as Ignatius, the child on Jesus' lap, who essentially told people to listen to the church fathers and to the apostolic succession. Okay, so, first of all, we don't know, without the apostolic succession in Christianity, one cannot even uphold that the New Testament is 100% authentic without essentially believing that Erasmus was somehow infallible. Secondly, like, we cannot essentially, we can't, give us a development of the transmission or the preservation when there's no apostolic succession, okay? There's no development in it, so we can't know. We pretty much have to sit for probably thousands of years assuming, right, that the Bible is uncorrupted, and then wait for Erasmus to compile everything and essentially and he say, look, by consensus the Bible is not corrupted. There are various things which contradict this, such as the Shem Tov manuscript, which was a manuscript by Ibn Shaprut written as a polemic, right? And Ibn Shaprut had literally copied it word for word from the commonplace manuscript for the Gospel of Matthew, in circulation among the Catholics and the Mozarabs. So, like, voting by consensus. Consensus is fine, but if there's consensus without transmission, okay, and we can't keep track of this consensus, we don't know where it came from. How are we supposed to know at all, like, that the New Testament is uncorrupted?
Mm-hmm.
Let's continue.
And let's just say the Masoretic text said a third bull, right? And then why does the Septuagint say a 3-year-old bull? Or
Right.
what does the Syriac, which is now after New Testament, but an Aramaic translation, why does that say a 3-year-old bull also? And then you discover in the Dead Sea Scrolls 3-year-old bull. You say, oh, that's most likely the original reading. So here you have a reading from the Dead Sea Scrolls that would be in harmony with the Septuagint, because otherwise you say, where did they get dig or pierce from? Well,
that doesn't make any sense, though, because the Syriac or Aramaic translation of the New Testament will be way after the Dead Sea Scrolls. They'd have no authority to make that translation. So it may match up. Honestly, you could say that's a coincidence at best, but you can't say they have any authority to make that statement. It came after the
Completely irrelevant. See, listen, he's repeating throughout the entirety of this video, right? The DSS and the Septuagint agree. We don't have origins for these things. Like, once again, we've just said multiple times, we do not have origins for these things. Missionaries will literally try to mystify, and this is why I think, okay, missionaries like Michael Brown, okay, make videos more for people who are already Christians as opposed to trying to convert people to Christianity. And first of all, Michael Brown, if you don't know, works with organizations like One for Israel, like igod.co.il,
Jews
right?
for Jesus.
Which are, they are missionary websites, right? Designed, okay, or missionary organizations primarily set up for Jews in Israel, okay, to try and convert them to Christianity. Their videos are very easily, I've looked at their videos, I've noticed that each and every single one of them are very easily debatable, okay? So when people who actually don't even know how to read a single letter of Hebrew, right, when they look at them, they ignore them. And I'm believing, and this is why, and they're making them very simple, right? But they're giving them this like sort of style and effect that is more made, that seems to be more made to actually dazzle Christian, mystify Christian audiences as opposed to Jewish audiences who disbelieve in Christianity. So this is why I think, okay, he's made these things essentially to give reassurance to his Christian viewers as opposed to try and convert Jews and bring them into the fold of Christianity. Because to me it's so seemingly,
they're too easy.
It's so seemingly easy. I don't think that these videos are primarily made for Jews as opposed to made for Christians.
Normally, when you have that threefold witness, which you don't normally have, some manuscripts, some Masoretic manuscripts, a tiny minority, but still some reflect it, then you'd say, oh, yeah, that's the most likely reading. Right. So from a text-critical viewpoint,
that's wrong. Can I tell you why that's wrong?
Yes.
Now he's saying from a textual critic standpoint, the most likely readings Yahoodi. The majority and the consensus of manuscripts in the Masoretic, right, and actually you can find them, not just that, but in Masoretic manuscripts, right, in Targumim, which are translations done by people before the Masoretic, okay, done by people essentially, Targumim, right, people who actually did translations into Koine Greek, okay, did this as Ke'ari. The reason why some of the Masoretic manuscripts translated as, Ke'aru, or didn't translate as, sorry, but, wrote it as Ke'aru is for a different reading, okay? It's essentially for a different reading. Doesn't necessarily give any sort of theological difference. However, right, once again, okay, he's saying from a textual critic standpoint, this is the most likely reading. So, no, the consensus of manuscripts, the consensus of translations, even done by that Greek by Jews before Jesus, right, translated as like a lion. So I don't know why he's coming out with this sort of consensus. It should be his his hands and feet were pierced, and a lion or his they were dug into, etc. I don't know why he's saying that. The most common reading is Ke'ari, like, period. Look at the Targumim. You can find them. You can even find online. You can find analyses of them online saying the same thing. You can find analysis of it. You can find analysis of Koine Greek translations before Jesus, etc. Like, so.
I mean, really, their best argument is that lions pierce you and they don't lick you. I don't think going to the original text is going to help them here.
Manuscripts, a tiny minority, but still some reflect it. Then you'd say, oh, yeah, that's the most likely reading. Right. So from a text critical viewpoint, the most likely reading of Psalm 22 is they pierced, or they dug through, they bore through my hands and feet. That's the most likely original reading of the Hebrew based on Jewish sources and Jewish scholarship. That's A.
Wait, what is he talking about? He didn't establish that at all.
He did quote two medieval Jewish scholars, which proves next to nothing, and he misquoted them, by the way.
No. He quoted Rashi, who said that a lion will dig through, and Rashi uses the word lion. Rashi is reading this as lion, Ke'ari, and that he was comparing this word, right, essentially to another verse. Now, what is he doing? So we already established, right, how he's quoting Rashi erroneously. Secondly, now he's saying that this is obviously the most likely reading by Jewish sources and Jewish scholars. So he hasn't established this. Why is he has not established this. See, this is what I mean, right? It seems to me that he makes these videos for Christians as opposed to Jews, right? Coming into the fold of Christianity. I think it's literally just done to keep Christians in, as opposed to bringing Jews in. Like, it's too simple. May I go on?
And I think it's kind of like the whole. I can't remember which verse in Genesis, but the whole Echad is a complex one argument. I remember Nabil Qureshi bringing that up a lot in his debate with Shabir Ali. But those Christians who use that argument would never use that against a Jew, because it would never work.
Because you have to ask them, just count to 3 in Hebrew. Like, listen, and then they'll say, isn't there an implication that it's, not Yachid, and, it's not Yachid, it's Echad? Like, no, there's not an implication. Like, once again, they're saying, well, look, and I don't want to discuss it right now because of the video, right? But they'll essentially use these mental gymnastics, right? Essentially to prove their point, or they'll come to false conclusions based off of conjecture, etc.
And if it's said like a lion, my hands and feet, the meaning is they're doing violence to my hands and feet. Why mention hands and feet? So, I mean, if we could even get distracted and forget either way, why talk? All my bones are out of joint. My mouth is dry. I'm naked here on the cross. I'm hanging here naked, and there's been violence done to my hands and feet. It's like, do you need anything more? The fact that the most likely reading is they pierced just pushes it one step further.
Well, and I think, as I think you put it in your book, lions do not lick hands and feet.
Exactly.
What? What is that? What is he doing?
Okay, I think his point is, if the lion is there, then he pierced him. Because lions don't lick. They're gonna bite you.
I don't think we're in disagreement here, but the thing is, okay, and Leo, let's just keep going, because I want to discuss this point further in the video. I want to,
Excuse me. So, when you put together then the earliest Jewish sources, and you allow the Greek Septuagint to speak, it refers to all this. But let me remind everybody what you pointed out from the beginning: the New Testament doesn't cite this verse. So the idea that somehow there is, well, if it doesn't say that, then it can't have anything to do with crucifixion, or the New Testament's proven wrong. The New Testament doesn't cite this text. It cites Psalm 22:1. It cites a number of the other texts in this area, obviously, but not this particular verse. And so no matter how you decide the textual variant, it's not going to impact the accuracy of the presentation in the New Testament one way or the other.
Yeah, I was doing a live TV debate with a couple of rabbis and Messianic pastors, and this one ultra-Orthodox rabbi said, "And the New Testament misquotes Psalm 22," and I said, "Actually, New Testament doesn't cite it." He goes, "It doesn't?"
Yeah.
And it was live TV, and I really quick just ran through, did the Method Concordance thing, and I said, "It doesn't." And I mean, he was shocked, and it was one of those TV moments. But here's what's also interesting. The New Testament does not get into a detailed description of everything that happened with the crucifixion. So it's not like, well, they were describing, and then they pierced his hands, and then they pierced his feet, and they left this out. Isaiah 53, piercing language used as well. It's not that every possible thing that could have been quoted was quoted, but enough is quoted to get us to look at the text and to say, oh my, this text is speaking of the Messiah.
It's always fascinated me that the gospel writers record the actual act of crucifixion with a subclause each time. They're not trying to focus upon that. And I think part of the reason they can do that, is the church's proclamation was focused upon the cross in the first place, so it was already there. And secondly, with the prophetic clarity of Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53, they didn't need to. There wasn't a reason to do that. So, and then, of course, they divide my garments among them. For my clothing, they cast lots, which is cited.
I have a few things to say about this. I can say that it does call the New Testament's accuracy into question, but that's not really the issue at hand. The issue is that Jesus, according to the original four Gospels, in the first two of them, he's crying out to God, "Why have you forsaken me?" And for anyone reading that, they're thinking that the message he's getting across is that he's being abandoned by God. And so the later Christian explanation is, oh, he's quoting Psalm 22. But then that doesn't even mesh right with the fact that Luke has him say something different. He has him say, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And then John has him say, "It is finished." So it doesn't seem like there was ever any unanimous agreement on what his last words were. The fact that Christians had to come later and say, oh, he's quoting Psalm 22 is quite telling, since the New Testament authors don't even quote that themselves. If the New Testament authors believed this about Psalm 22, then it seems pretty likely that they would quote it, because it's a pretty significant passage to explain away an apparent contradiction.
I agree. Yeah. This is it's complete nonsense. We can delve into why Psalm 22 doesn't discuss Jesus in this video right now. But let's keep going for now to see if Michael Brown or James White say anything embarrassing. Let's keep going.
I gotta take a
Far off, O you, my help, hasten to my assistance. Here you go. Deliver my soul from the sword, my only life from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth. They're really into lions here. From the horns, the wild oxen. You answer.
By the way, that's Aryeh against spelled in full. So you would have had it misspelled differently, a defective spelling in the verse we were just looking at, Ari versus Aryeh. So you have Aryeh two other times, but it's always spelled that same way. So again, just another point to make you wonder, was it originally Ari, or maybe
I don't know what he's talking about. Let's keep going.
It was Ka'aru. So okay, back to you.
So here's the objection. We've already addressed it, but some people need to hear it over and over again. How can you say that these passages are fulfilled in Jesus when Jesus dies? And as you pointed out, but I want to make sure.
I think that's very significant, considering the fact that the whole message of the psalm is that the person being persecuted will be saved, but Jesus, according to Christians, wasn't saved.
There's another passage which destroys in this very chapter, which completely crumbles the entire idea. This is referring to Jesus, but let's keep going. We'll get to that. Let's keep going.
This is one of the biggest stumbling blocks for our Muslim friends, is they really see the death of Christ in a very unbiblical fashion. Your average, I'm not talking here about the Muslim apologists who read up on this stuff and are going and meeting with Jewish rabbis and utilizing their information and stuff like that.
Oh no, he called me out. I've been caught. I mean, I'd rather. I mean, I'd
No,
rather
they-
get my Jewish information from a Jew
Yeah.
because
apparently.
I've seen so many times how Christians retcon their thinking into the OT.
Yeah, they're doing it right now. But yeah.
I had a friend who went to Uganda a number of years ago, and he related a conversation he had with a Muslim who just came out of the bush. I mean, he just was, living in the jungle, and he comes out and finds out that my friend is a Christian, and they start talking, and he just says to him, he says, I just don't understand why you Christians would believe that Allah would allow such a wonderful prophet to die in such an ignoble way. Because in their mind, for God to allow that
This
to
has
happen,
nothing to do with Psalm 22, by the way. So
Yeah, I
everyone
know.
bring this up.
He's just responding to this very reasonable argument that we've been throwing their way. Like, he is one of the greatest prophets according to Christians and Muslims. Yet you guys believe that despite that, God will let him die such a horrible death, a horrible, humiliating death. Like, that's just awful.
Yeah,
ref-
to us is why it just does. I don't even. Nobody knows why he's bringing this up, and this is once again adding to my point. They don't make this for Jews; they make it for Christians.
Right.
Okay, like because now he's bringing up just a completely nonsensical story about his friend meeting a Muslim in Uganda talking about Jesus being crucified. What does it have to do with Psalm 22?
Well, I guess this is like he wants to preach to us that Psalm 22 should make us think that Jesus should die or something.
They think Muslims don't believe that the Psalms of the Jews or the Psalms of the Christians are accurate. So once again, this is
I mean,
nonsense.
even then, it's like this. If something before Christianity accurately prophesies something in Christianity, then it's a valid argument. The problem, however, is one, it doesn't, and two, you're still not getting past the big hurdle, which is God allowing such a horribly humiliating death to occur to a prophet. And the only way to get out of this is to say Jesus had to die for our sins, but then that just opens up a whole other can of worms, because Muslims don't believe in vicarious atonement. We never will.
Flex this is dearness way, because in their mind, for God to allow that to happen reflects on Jesus's dearness and standing in God's sight. And so we have to be so careful to emphasize, Jesus said, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord. He does this in perfect harmony with the Father. This is so important to
You know what? I get so annoyed when they quote that, because I know they're quoting John, but if they go back to the Synoptics, they have Jesus praying to not get crucified. He straight up says, let not my will but your will pass. Please take this cup from me. He doesn't want to get crucified. The only time when you find him saying, no, I lay my own life down, I will not pray to get out of this, you're going to find that in John.
lay these, especially here, this idea that, well, but in all these prophecies, even when you quoted from Hebrews, he cried out and was heard.
Who wrote Hebrews?
Well, how was he heard? And we can very easily say, well, he was heard in the resurrection, but it's very hard for our Muslim friends to see.
You see, this is another thing. This is another theological point that annoys me. If you tell me that, okay, according to the Psalm, Jesus was heard, he was saved in the resurrection. He wasn't saved then. He died. He was destroyed. He was restored, but he wasn't saved from destruction because he was destroyed. There was no saving.
So, Tehillim 22, right? Michael Brown is asserting, okay, that because of the fact that the possible reading, ke'aru, okay, means to dig through, right, is not to pierce, by the way, but means to dig through, right, means essentially that this is not a Christian misreading of Psalm 22, or they don't misquote it, etc. He's saying as well, he proclaims that ke'aru was the consensus reading instead of ke'ari, which is nonsensical, okay? You can see in the Aramaic, you can see in the Onkelos Targum to Tehillim 22, verse 17, he uses the word, okay, and so you can see, right, essentially, instead of saying, ke'ari, right? He does say ke'ari, right? But you can see in the Aramaic, right? He says ke'ariu, okay? In my pronunciation or in other pronunciations, ke'ariya. Now, that literally means lion, okay? Onkelos, right, had received his transmission, okay, from the time of the Pharisees, okay, he received his transmission from the generations previous to him, okay. We can see in other Masoretic manuscripts, the majority of them which we have today, right, reading this as ke'ari as opposed to ke'aru, and that the rest, right, of essentially the Targumim, the rest of the Greek translations also use ke'ari and not ke'aru, so it is not the commonplace reading. Now, we're going to demonstrate why, firstly, Psalm 22, verse 18 does not apply to Jesus. Okay? So the first thing I want to point out, because the Christians are reading this with completes, the Christians are basically cherry picking verses. Okay, and we'll demonstrate why. Psalm 22, verse 24, right? Yirai Hashem, all right? You who fear the Lord, praise him. All the seed of Jacob honor him and fear him, all the seed of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So who is this referring to? Yani, is this referring to Jesus? Because he is now saying, right, the Christians believe essentially that this is now referring to Jesus Christ. This is what the chapter is about. But we see here, you who fear the Lord, praise him. All the seed of Jacob honor him and fear him, all the seed of Israel. So wait. So first of all, the word, and I do want to point out, right, the Christians will like to say, well, it means that the Christians and the church are the successor to the nation of Israel. That's what it means. And let's demonstrate why it doesn't. The word here, okay, used for seed, zera. Zera is never used for anything non-biological. Zera literally it literally means, right, seed as in like descendants, right, as in literal ethnic by blood descendants. That is exactly what zera means. It's always biological, okay? It does not imply some kind of successor. When you adopt somebody, you will not say huzera, huzerai. You will not say that, okay? You will not call him of your seed. You will say that you have adopted him and that he is a ger, he is a foreigner, right? But you will not say that he is zera Yisrael. You will not say that he is the seed of Israel, right? So right here, okay, you can't make this sort of argument that it's referring to essentially the church, right? Now it says, let's repeat again, you who fear the Lord praise him, all the seed of Jacob honor him and fear him, all the seed of Israel. But wait, it says called Zera Yisrael. It says called Zera Yaakov, all literally meaning all the seed of Jacob, all the seed of Israel. So wait, hold on. So all the seed of Jacob, okay, if we're talking about this in future tense, right? Because let's be consistent, right? Why is it now, okay, that it is essentially saying that all the seed of Jacob honor him and all the seed of Jacob and all the seed of Israel fear him after he was crucified, after he died on the cross? But the seed of Jacob and the seed of Israel do not honor him. They don't. They're opposite to him. The seed of Jacob and the seed of Israel resent. They view Jesus as essentially a front, right, against the Jewish people. They view Jesus as literally a symbol of like centuries of Jewish mass murder and suppression. So wait, hold on. All the seed of Jacob, it says all, by the way, and all the seed of Israel. But all the seed of Israel and all the seed of Jacob reject Jesus. Only a minority betochenu accept Jesus, and we reject them for doing so. Only around maybe 20,000 people who are Jews accept Jesus, worldwide, who are of the seed of Israel. So, once again, where is the mass acceptance? Where is all, by the way, meaning without exception, where is all the seed of Israel taking upon Jesus? Where is all the seed of Israel accepting him? It just doesn't make any sense. Now, let's go to, okay, verses 20 to 22. But you, O Lord, do not distance yourself. My strength hasten to my assistance. Save my soul from the sword, my only one from the grip of the dog. Okay? Now, then it goes into 22. Okay? Save me from the lion's mouth, as from the horns of the wild oxen you answered me. So wait, wouldn't this imply, right, that the person was saved on the cross and was saved from his punishment and was saved from this torture and pain, and that he received Geula while on the cross? Right?
Yeah,
Well, it does.
It actually baffles me that they try to use this against us, because this is exactly what we believe happened. We're the ones who are telling them Jesus was saved.
Save my soul from the sword. Jesus was not saved from the sword on the cross. Jesus suffered every moment on the cross. Jesus did not receive any liberation from it. He only was revived after feeling physical pain done to him and being ripped to shreds on a cross. So no, Jesus did not receive any geula, right? Yaakov Avinu, right? You can see that, in the whole controversy of him, saying the angel who redeemed me, right? Jacob saying the angel redeemed me. The word here means that he saved me, right? He saved me from all sorts of danger, right? Or all sorts of evil, okay? Being done to him, evil that wished to harm him. But we don't see that Jesus is getting saved from that. We see Jesus is revived after feeling like hours of getting like torn apart on a cross. So wait, now it's supposed to be somebody who was on the cross is being saved, but he was not saved while on the cross, so it doesn't make any sense. Now let's discuss, okay, who the entire chapter of Psalm 22 is actually talking about. All right, you can see in Psalm 22, okay, and you can compare the language of Psalm 22 to the language of the Book of Lamentations. Right? If any of you read Lamentations, any Christian who cites Lamentations from prophecy, for prophecy is lying, and that means that they haven't read the Book of Lamentations. The Book of Lamentations, Sefer Eichu, was written by Yirmiyahu Navi, alav shalom, Jeremiah the prophet, alav shalom. Regarding, it was transmitted from God to him, right? Essentially, and then he transmitted it to Ben Neria, and it was written regarding the destruction of Jerusalem, right? It was written regarding the destruction of Israel, her people, and how the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple, was destroyed, and the Jewish people would be in pain. You can compare this language also to the book of Isaiah, which prophesizes the same thing, right? Now, we understand, right? The Christians will, as we mentioned before, they used verses, okay, with non-specific language, okay? They used passages with non-specific language to either take it out of context or viciously misunderstood to prove their point, okay? So you'll never find a Christian going to a verse in the Old Testament, right, or a chapter, I keep cutting out, in the Old Testament, right, and you'll never see them, right, essentially bring to you a specific passage. You're not going to see there will be a man named Jesus who come, and I'm not saying this has to be, right, you're never going to see there will be a man named Jesus who comes forth from, essentially Bethlehem, and he will, turn water into wine. You're not going to see these things, okay? You're not going to see these sorts of, specific, things applied to Jesus. There's nothing in the Old Testament that is unique to Jesus, okay, and not unique to thousands of other people or subject matter. And we can demonstrate why here, okay? What is Psalm 22 talking about? It is talking about the nation of Israel, okay, and its destruction, right? It is talking about essentially how the Jewish people, right, will be displaced and dispersed, okay, and how we will be led back, right, into, right, over throughout the generations, okay, into our home, which we once essentially, which we once had longed for, okay. This is what it refers to. Azabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? You have crushed me. The lion has crushed. He has crushed me with the lion's mouth, etc. Right? Now, it's literally referring to the fact, right, that the Jews, okay, have been, attacked. They have been torn from our home, okay, and we are now in exile. And then repeatedly we are allowed back into our land, okay. David, right, is actually talking about the destruction of Jerusalem here, because of the fact that David, when he died, his successor Solomon, okay, according to the Book of Kings, fell into idolatry, right, and essentially fell into fell into witchcraft, fell into idolatry, and so did many parts of the nation of Israel. As a result of this, okay, Nebuchadnezzar was allowed to conquer Israel by God, and then he destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple, okay, and then that's why Jeremiah wrote Sefer Eichu. Sefer Eichu, the Book of Lamentations, is almost like a psalm in of itself, because of the fact that the language that it uses, my garments were torn from me, right? We can actually see with this verse, my garments were torn from me, right? It says the same thing actually in the Book of Lamentations, saying and basically repeating that the dress of Jerusalem, her dress was taken from her, it was violated, she was dirty, etc., right? And that she was plundered, she was violently murdered, right? That essentially, she was completely desecrated, and her people and the pathways leading to her were completely desolate and gone. This is Lamentations is a repetition of this psalm, okay? So we've already demonstrated why this is not Jesus Christ, and now we have demonstrated why this is not unique to Jesus, okay, and why it is actually more likely to be, okay, referring to the Book of Lamentations as opposed to Jesus Christ dying on the cross.
That will be the end of it. Please like, share, and sub.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.